Welcome back to Tales from the Bridge. Adrian Tchaikovsky is with us today, and if you have not heard the episode we did with Adrian, just look back about a year ago on our episode list and you will find that. We love having Adrian on the show, one of our favorite writers, and just really fun to hang out with. Next week, Peter Watts and Carl Schrader are on the show. They talk about all kinds of interesting stuff. We just let them go at it. It's a huge amount of fun. Join us for that one. All right, Adrian's waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge. With us today is one of the Bridge's favorite authors, Adrian Tchaikovsky. I say favorite because there are many books that we have read together, and most we have different appreciations for, even when we all enjoy it. But Adrian's Children of Time series seems to take the prize for most loved by all of us. And we are very excited to read the third installment, Children of Memory, that hits shelves on November 22nd. Also, if you haven't listened to our first chat with Adrian from last year, please go check out our past episodes. And there's a list there. You can find that episode from, I think it was October last year. So, Adrian, thank you so much for joining us again on The Bridge.
Thank you. That's very kind. I'm going to need to jump in with a correction relevant to your listeners, I suspect. The release date in November is in the UK.
Right.
In the States, it's January. In Canada, it's out now through some oversight, as far as I can work out. But
I'm going to go get it. I'm going to download it right now. Can I do that, Adrian?
Wow, that's amazing.
I think it's literally out today in Canada.
What?
And available. Or that's I was told it was going to be earlier there than in the UK, and I've seen stuff on social media to suggest it is today.
Well, fantastic. That's great.
You need to remember that the author is usually the least sort of well informed of anyone in the business as far as when anything is happening. But yeah, sadly for the sort of the main US at least, it's all the way back in January.
One of the few times that it's advantageous to be Canadian when it comes to publishing. You know, this I never hear about this sort of thing. We Canadians getting it first. This is a first.
Almost everything in Canada is an equal mix of Europe and America, right? So we're usually right in the middle. It's nice to be ahead. Yeah.
Oh, but that's exciting. All right, so I know what I'm doing after this call or tomorrow morning. So, Adrian, you have got a lot of in-person events coming up, I believe, and I'm just curious to know, is this something that happens with all your releases? Is this specific to this release because Children of Time is so well received? Or is this something that's because COVID's kind of quietening down a bit?
Yeah, it's kind of none of the above, to be honest. So, because I work with multiple publishers who don't necessarily consult one another before bringing stuff out, I've got another book out at the beginning of December, just a couple of weeks after Children of Memory in the UK, which is City of Last Chances, and the events I'm doing around the beginning of December, which is basically I'm barely seeing the inside of my home for the first 2 weeks of December, frankly, are mostly to do with the with City of Last Chances, which I'm kind of happy to do everything I can for, because it's my first fantasy book for quite a while, having done science fiction books for years, and I'm really keen that it does well, because I had an enormous amount of fun writing it. I'd like them to let me do another one.
Well, that's fantastic. Tell us about that book.
Okay, it's it's my big fantasy city book that I've been planning to do for years. It's kind of a bit Les Miserables and a bit Casablanca in an occupied fantasy city, and it follows the lives of a bunch of very ordinary people who are trying not to be the protagonists of a fantasy novel, because that's dangerous and you can get killed. So the main characters there are students and professors, and there are innkeepers, and there are pawnbrokers, and there are trade unionists, and all of whom are living in an occupied city where a rebellion is brewing, and all of whom are trying not to have anything to do with it. And needless to say, get absolutely caught up in what's going on.
Can you remind us the name? What was the name of that one?
That is City of Last Chances. It's also, if you look up if you look it up on online, it's got one of the nicest covers that any of my books have ever had. Children of Memory, which is the other sort of big release I've got right at the moment, should be available now, to my understanding. But that's not the one I'm specifically pushing at these book events.
I can confirm
Okay.
that Children of Memory is available in Canada. I'm looking at it right now on Amazon, so I can pay for it right now. And I'm also looking at the City of Last Chance's cover, and I agree, it is a really interesting cover. It's almost kind of communist in nature. There's sort of a red theme and not a lot of color, and it's intriguing. I'm not sure where the art came from for this, Adrian. Do you have any say in the cover art, or
We
where did
had
this come
quite
about
a lot of backwards and forwards. I mean, the idea, it's meant to look, give a bit of a sense of the sort of like an 19th century political pamphlet, or sort of book plate. One of the great joys in this for me, because a lot of the time you get a relatively generic cover that points the reader at this is this sort of book, but doesn't necessarily reflect a lot of the hard detail from the story. All of the stuff in the City of Last Chance's cover relates to the book. Every single little detail in this cover is something to do with what's going on, which
that's really interesting.
will mean very little to to readers browsing it in the shop. But to me as the author, it's enormously flattering.
So when we spoke to you a year ago, you had finished Children of Memory. Would you have finished City of Last Chances as well, or was that something working on a little bit after? Or?
I was working on it afterwards, and I would probably have either just finished it or been finishing it around the end of last year.
So it is about. Would you say it's about a year between finishing, editing, and
I think
that
that's
release? Then?
kind
Is
of
that common?
the minimum for a novel. Certainly with most publishers like a year to plan and get marketing and fit it into their schedules. And so although it takes me on average about 6 months, I like to allow about a year to writing a book in case anything goes wrong. And so, yeah, it's you're kind of working about 2 years ahead, really, with what you're doing at any given time.
Well, can I ask, actually, while we're talking about that, I've been reading your novellas, Elder Race, The Expert Systems Brother, The Expert Systems Champion, and I really love that because, when you take on a big book, sometimes it's a bit much. But these are 200 pages, they're concentrated, and your writing especially is so full of world building, and you're so good at it that it's really a pleasure to just like plop into one of these and like, you're in this world right away, boom, and it's a great little story. And I'm just curious how that works for you with your process and with publishers. Like, do they ask you, hey, can you give us like 2 or 3 novellas this year, or 1 a year, or whatever it is? Or is this something that you sort of start writing and then it sort of reaches a natural end, maybe, at 200, you're like, you know what, I think this is a novella, and rather than continuing into building it into a novel. How does that work?
I mean, most of the time when I'm writing, I'll know ahead of time whether it's going to be a novella or a novel or a trilogy or something, and that will obviously affect the pacing and the amount of side plots and other detail that go into the book. This doesn't always work. I've had recently a novella where I basically got about 3/4 of the way through, had gone way past the novella limit, and realised, I'm going to have to actually expand this into a novel. Because there's no way I can deal with the 2 themes I wanted to bring out in the space of 40,000 words. Novellas are, obviously novellas are not a new thing, but as far as being a viable publishing prospect, they kind of are. So there are a relatively small number of publishers that will put out novellas, although that number is growing. Tor.com are the best known ones, who published all the ones that you mentioned there, and they kind of repopularized the novella as when they were set up as a separate imprint under the Pan Macmillan line, and have done enormously well, and have basically kind of reinvented that particular writing form, and other publishers are following suit. I write a lot of novellas for Rebellion, for example, and I'm currently about 3 ahead at the moment. They're bringing them out at 1 a year currently. So my 6th one with them will come out early next year. And amazing. I've got another 6 contracted for, 2 of which I've written. So either they will start doing them 2 a year, which is entirely possible because they are a relatively quick writing prospect, or I theoretically will be writing novellas for them until about 2030.
Wow. Neat. Well, I like the form, and you're right. I've been buying books my whole life. My hobby is to go to a bookstore and see what's new, and these are just popping up everywhere. I mean, yours, and I've read some by Becky Chambers, right? When she sort of burst onto the stage, suddenly she was also publishing novellas. And what I like about them is they're great gifts. And so maybe, this is a good season, I guess, to mention this. But when you give somebody an 800-page book, you got to know that person pretty well, and they're, trust that they're interested and they're going to read it. And usually they don't, right? And it's like, oh, thanks. You gave me this huge tome that I'll probably never get to. But you give somebody a novella, and that's great. That's a wonderful gift. It's like, oh, I could read this in a weekend, right? And so it's a way to swap ideas and sort of give people, oh, you should check out this author. Try this, right? It's an easy way to sort of take a taste test or a test drive.
Yeah, I mean,
so
for the novella, it's interesting. There are two particular niches that they fulfill extremely well, and there's one niche for reasons that are only peripherally to do with the form that they work in really badly. So novellas work very well as ebooks. People quite like the idea of an ebook that you're going to get to the end of it fairly quickly. With a physical book, the size kind of has a weird psychological effect. People like, especially in science fiction and fantasy, they like a nice big thick book. With an ebook, it's not an issue, and I think short stories are making a bit of a comeback. Because people, they are almost like popcorn reading on your commute or something like that, and novellas are kind of following on in the same way. The other niche that novellas fit very well is that really quite highly produced, rather sort of beautiful physical object book works very well as a novella. You can frequently lavish quite a lot of time and attention. I mean, the books, the hardback books that Rebellion do are the limited edition, are really very nice books, and they produce 1,000 to 2,000 of them, and then after that it's ebook and or audiobook only. But I think novellas are particularly suited to that, and that's an enormously booming market, as I understand it, with book clubs and other associations doing their own sort of dedicated special editions of books. The one it doesn't work, of course, is audiobooks. I do have audiobooks of some of my novellas, but the problem is entirely to do with Audible credits, because the same credit will get you a 200-page novella or War and Peace. And so people do tend to vote with the amount of hours and minutes of a book. So audio, despite the fact that I've even narrated some of my own, and it's a great deal of fun, but I'm aware that they're not the most it's not the most profitable wing of publishing.
That's interesting. I was wondering whether the kind of the analytics around that would bear out those preferences. So novellas sell well electronically, but maybe less in physical, and it sounds like they don't sell as well through audiobook. So we like to read fewer words on electronic devices, but we like to listen to more on electronic devices. But we like to read more on paper. That's a fascinating bit of observation.
Yeah, I mean, it is literally just the Audible credit system that means a novella on audio is problematic, because people don't feel, I think, they're getting their money's worth, in the same way that going to a bookshop and spending whatever your equivalent of on sort of £15 on a book, or say £12 on a novella, which is much, much smaller. A lot of people, especially sci-fi and fantasy readers who are kind of trained to expect big books, are going to go for the blockbuster.
And it's a good observation, Marty, that giving somebody a big book, you really got to know them. It's like giving them a puppy versus a goldfish. You can kind of give a goldfish to anybody, but a puppy's a big commitment.
Yeah, I'll have this fish killed within a month. So, whereas it'll take me a lot longer to neglect my puppy.
That's true. Well, I was just going to ask, with the City of Last Chances, you mentioned it's your first fantasy book coming out in a while. And it sounds like this is exciting for you. Is this a shift based on preferences towards more fantasy again?
It's something I wanted to do for quite a while. I really love writing fantasy. The extra kind of freedom of world building and the way, because world building is basically the part of the process that I enjoy the most. is enormously fun. In this case, it was also a bit of a writing experiment because it was the first time I've written a book that I didn't plan very thoroughly from start to finish. But for quite a long while, it's very much been the case that publishers have been wanting me to do sci-fi for them because Children of Time did very well, and that's kind of what I'm known for now. Even though I started off with a 10-book epic fantasy series way back in the day.
Really, you're a sci-fi and fantasy author.
When I can be, yeah.
Well, and I'd just like to point out, especially the Elder Race, right? It's like a perfect little story for you to write because it's this classic science fiction fantasy, two perspective, right? There's sort of a colony which has sort of degraded over time and become much more sort of a pastoral civilization, but there's still these hibernating original scientists who are wizards to these people, right? So in this book, it's really great. And in one point, I love how you did this. On a single page, you write the same story from the sort of scientists and science fiction perspective and the colonists' sort of fantasy perspective. And it's very clear, right? It's the same story, but written from two perspectives and using two different languages. And that's great. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Adrian, last time we spoke, we brushed up a little bit on film, which I think is really fun, especially for a lot of our listeners who they want to hear about your writing and what you're up to, but they also want to hear about what you like, what you grew up on and that kind of stuff. So I'm just interested to know, last time I think you had mentioned Battle Beyond the Stars, which is a beautiful little film with great, fantastic music, and it's not well known because it kind of didn't age too well. However, it has a lot of elements that are hugely important to film, I would say. But can you tell us a little bit about what else was inspirational to you from that time, I guess 70s and 80s? And then also, I do want to know about future shows that or even shows you're watching now. Can you tell us a little bit about what you enjoyed growing up and what you're looking forward to seeing soon?
Yeah, I mean, I won't go into huge detail about Star Wars or the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. They were very influential on me, but they were kind of influential on pretty much everyone. And so it's just really more of the same. I mean, in the same way that Battle Beyond the Stars is a film that is not sort of 100% critically praised in all quarters, another film that I enormously enjoyed at the time, which is now kind of derided a lot, and which I still somewhat stand by, is Krull.
Yes.
I mean, it's.
Well, I think we mentioned this. That's right.
We did. Yeah. I mean, it's
a little bit, not too much, but we did. Yeah.
It's got. I mean, it's this very weird thing where it is someone was going to do a sort of a sword and sorcery movie, and then almost echoing my own problem I've been talking about recently. But then suddenly science fiction was the thing, and they were like, well, let's kind of make it in space, only not really. Like the minimum possible number of changes to make it look a bit appealing to the Star Wars crowd. There are a whole string of really cool ideas and very, very unique sort of visual elements to Krull. The bad guys, especially the Slayers, are particularly effective. The way they kind of rise up out of the ground and their sort of semi-invulnerability to the sort of regular weaponry that the main characters can deploy. There's a really good stop motion spider in that, which is I'm always up for a bit of good stop motion, and just the idea that you've got the citadel of the beast, the citadel, the kind of the main Dark Lord enemy. His main defense is it just moves around. You don't know where it's going to be from one day to the next, and therefore storming the castle becomes an enormous problem. And most of the film is them just trying to find by various magical means where the hell it's going to be, so that they can actually get their castle storming business underway. Yeah, and also it's it's got this weird. An awful lot of relatively small roles are played by people who will be phenomenally famous relatively shortly after, up to and including Liam Neeson.
That's right. Yeah. And then upcoming stuff or current shows. I mean, I think you spoke a little bit about Sandman. Was that really exciting for you to visit Sandman?
That was Sandman was a thing. It was one of the. I think that's got to be right up there as one of the best adaptations I've ever seen. And it's one of those things. I know if I went back to the comics, I'd find all manner of ways that the comics differ from the TV show. Because I mean, I read them quite a while ago, so I don't remember them in that kind of detail. However, from the point of view of watching the TV show, I remember this bit, I remember this bit, remember this bit, and I came away having seen an extremely good show and also having felt that it's been an extremely faithful adaptation at all points, even probably where it hasn't been, because the whole thing had that just everything fit together very neatly. Also, all right, so here's the thing about Sandman from a writer perspective. It has a really interesting structure. It does not have the structure that a regular TV show has, because it has effectively within that first series there are two completely separate plot arcs. There are there are some common characters like the Corinthia and so forth, but it's I think 3 or 4 episodes, and then there's a palate cleanser episode, and then there's another 3 or 4 episodes, and then and the rather excellent sort of bonus one they threw in at the end. I am absolutely up for more shows that want to do that, and weirdly I think my absolute favourite part of the whole series were the little one-off episodes they used to kind of space everything out.
And then just to jump over, and without opening too big of a can of worms here, and talking about good writing, the Rings of Power, where I mean, it's I want to be on its side, and I think I am, but I hear so much criticism. Do you have a little bit of an opinion on that show without going?
I'm about halfway through it at the moment.
Okay.
I have, and it's one of those sort of. It's got several plots, and I like some of the plots, and other than the plots, I'm kind of waiting for them to get somewhere and to get up to speed. There's a certain sense that where I am in the middle, the Numenor plot is almost literally treading water, waiting for the other plots to get to a point where the Numenorians can kind of turn up over on sort of Middle Earth mainland. I'm really enjoying the Hobbits, and I'm really enjoying the orcs. I mean, it's always interesting to see how orcs are approached. I think these are. It's both in look and the way that they are, what they're doing and how they're presented. It's been quite an interesting trip with them. So I mean, I've fallen victim to being in the middle of about 3 different TV series at the moment. So I need to actually sit down and take the time to finish them off. Now they're finish-offable.
It's a full-time job just trying to keep up with all of the great content that's coming out.
It is a bit, isn't it?
I mean,
what I'm enjoying the hell out of is Andor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through on that one.
Yeah.
But I have loved every moment of that. It's got a level of sort of character and nuance and sort of detail, believable detail that Star Wars tends to go for like broad brush, bigger picture stuff. And I mean, in the same way that I really loved Rogue One, I like stories about relatively ordinary people doing things rather than sort of the great sort of prophesied promised prince sort of narrative, which I guess I've seen so many times in fantasy it feels a bit stale.
I agree with you about Andor. It is a totally different approach, or it's a somewhat different approach than any other of the stories that have occurred in the Star Wars universe, but it is a bit more maybe adult, and I do like the regular. I agree with that. The characters being more approachable, and even getting more workings into the Empire and understanding the bureaucracy of it, and seeing all that in the startings of the rebellion. It is a great. I really like it. It gets a lot of everything gets trounced online, and it's about the journey with these, and Andor seems to be keeping me clicking as well. It's a good one.
And is the third show you're in the middle of House of Dragons?
No, because I don't have the relevant network to watch it.
Right.
I was a bit lukewarm by the end of Game of Thrones, so I wasn't rushing to see it. I'm sure I will see it at some point, and I've heard some good things about it. The third show is actually a German historical drama called Babylon Berlin, set in the years of the Weimar Republic, which feels very, very resonant at the moment.
I haven't even heard that one. What's that one all about?
So it's basically it's a crime drama, but it's set in the Weimar Republic. So it's sort of early 30s. You have the rise of Nazism and fascism going on. You have the whole sort of stab in the back conspiracy theory about the First World War, which is going to lead a lot of people into backing the nationalists later on. It's a really, really beautifully recreated sort of historical drama. So it's not sort of genre at all in our normal sense, but that displacement in time and place for me it kind of ticks a lot of the same boxes for me.
Well, if I can give a recommendation, if nobody has seen yet The Peripheral, or if you have seen The Peripheral, I'm keeping right up with that one, and I'm really enjoying it. This is the adaptation of William Gibson's book of the same name, I think 2014 novel, and it's a gritty, a really interesting idea, sci-fi, and the adaptation is good as far as I can tell, and I'm keeping with it. Have you seen that one, Adrian?
I haven't. It is certainly on my radar to watch, and I've heard nothing but good things about it.
Yeah, I believe it's an Amazon one, so you have to have that walled garden.
Well, and I just love the fact, I haven't seen it yet either, but it came out of nowhere for me, and I love the fact that it's, William Gibson. Jeez, like, finally somebody's taking, like, these great, truly great science fiction authors, right, that have done seminal works, and, we've grown up with Neuromancer. Neuromancer had such an effect on the Matrix and so much of culture that, I want more of these kinds of films and movies and TV shows to be made out of, big deal science fiction authors or fantasy authors, right? There's a lot of hay to be made there. And, we get so much TV now, but a lot of it's just sort of by, some random author, and it's okay. But I think, the world's ready to get more from sort of, big, important authors.
Speaking as a random author, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, you're a big, important author, Tchaikovsky, not a random author.
I do wonder. I'm sure the film rights are tied up in some incredible snarl of rights business, but it would be really nice to see a fairly faithful filming of Neuromancer at some point, because even though it's lent its DNA to so many things that came after it, I think there's also a lot of really very beautiful and specific specific sort of moments and twists and characters in Neuromancer and in that universe, which would be so much fun to see on the stage, maybe even as animation, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just thinking, the effects of technology has caught up to be able to actually give us the visual of cyberspace as he described, like code, right? That's what I remember from that book, the visual sort of description of, what is it, ice?
Yeah.
I seem to recall. Yeah. I mean, it's in there somewhere, and now the effects could be truly amazing to actually see that.
It's weird. Neuromancer is almost, it is almost kind of an alternate past now, because things have moved on in the real world, both politically and technologically. So, but there's so much in that world which had this weird kind of Baroque beauty to it. And also, weirdly, this has been a thing I've said about the book for a while, and looking at the world now, we're almost swinging back towards a lot of the things in that book which looked like they were just fanciful sort of 10 years ago. War with Russia, for example, that's suddenly on the table again. But also things like so you've got that, the big luxury space station where the enormously wealthy Tessia Ashpool family live, as this kind of orbital playground. And I'm just thinking, I can absolutely see someone like Elon Musk building that, for example. Maybe not getting to Mars, but having that completely detached sort of luxury home in the sky, and then at the end of that you've got this little almost labyrinth which is the private residence of the corporate family that owns it all. That actually feels very resonant in a way it maybe didn't sort of 10-15 years ago.
And Jeff Bezos, his low Earth orbit company, Blue Origin, they've said publicly that they'd like to create the orbital reef, is what they call it, right? They want to create their own private space station. That's this science fiction becoming science fact.
Does that tech stuff excite you, Adrian, or are you kind of not interested in that?
The tech does not excite me in and of itself because, frankly, I do not understand it well enough to get excited about the exciting things that are doubtless there. The social knock-on of that tech, how it is used, how it reflects society, and how it alters society is far more interesting to me.
Before we do move on, I just want to throw back one film recommendation that we've probably talked about way too much on the show here, but Mad God by Phil Tippett. And that's just because you mentioned you like motion capture or stop animation. It's a gorgeous, haunting, dark, grotesque film. If you've got Shudder, that's probably the easiest way to watch it, but there's a few other ways. But Mad God by Phil Tippett, who is a genius, and he was on our show back a few months ago, and it just I've seen it a couple times. I can revisit that a few times. It's hilariously gross and amazing.
Well, I've not even heard of that one, so I've jotted it down. I'll go and have a look.
Well, personally, I like the that kind of special effect. I like puppets. I like seeing something that's real. I do think that having computers to help out here and there definitely is okay, but we spoke with Jerry Anderson's son, Jamie, a little while back too, who created Thunderbirds, and I want to see more things that are real, and I think a lot of people do out there. So
well, it's an often
Mad God
quoted,
suits.
It's an often quoted thing that practical effects will always look decent no matter how much time has passed, whereas CGI effects will look great and flashy in the moment, and then 5 years later they will look extremely dated because of the speed that industry is sort of developing. Yeah.
Which I'm curious to see what happens with this Avatar, if that'll be well received, or if that'll be out of it. It just, is it a big cartoon, or what is it now? I'm no idea how to think about that one. We'll see soon.
Have you, Adrian, is there anything you could talk about with your own stories or books ever going to film? Is there anything happening there?
Oh, good Lord. So my kind of curse in that line is that the book that I am known for is also the least filmable thing I've ever written. Because Children of Time is hard. I mean, there has certainly been interest. The film rights went shortly after the Clark Award. And then they lapsed, and now they are technically out again in a way that I can't really go into in detail. But yes, there is someone who is currently looking at that. It's a tough prospect. It's a tough prospect because so much of the narrative is internalized discussion about a society of creatures that are completely non-human and don't even communicate in a way that we would even detect. So there is this kind of Scylla and Charybdis line of you go one way and you effectively lose everything that's interesting about the book by trying to make it accessible, or you go the other way and it isn't accessible, and so no one knows what the hell is going on. And I'm sure that there is a line you can plot between those two, but it's a tough call. And like I say, pretty much every other thing I have ever written is probably easier to bring to the screen than that. There are occasionally people who pop up and say, they're interested in this or that other project. Nothing has come to anything yet, which is the case of 99% of all of these things, whether they're optioned or not, because that's just the way the business goes. If there's anyone out there listening, drop me a line.
It strikes me that Children of Time might be the perfect candidate for a higher level of technology that doesn't exist yet, right? Like once we get VR, or once we can really plug in, like, Ready Player One styles, right, where you're stimulating the brain. Imagine if we could actually then use that to go into the mind of truly different beings, right? Go into the feel and experience and be a spider inside that story. It might just take that level of technology and simulation before we can get to that story.
That sounds like a recipe for either psychosis or serious motion sickness.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a big can of worms. Yeah.
Literally.
It does sound like a frustrating industry to try to get into, is this film, selling the options and then it being batted around by different production agencies and then it lapsing, and we've heard that from other authors as well. So I feel your pain.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the original film option involved a really quite respectable sum of money changing hands that I wasn't having to do any extra work for. So I can't really complain about the system as it was. But yes, I mean, it is very weird because you have these conversations with people, and everyone in the film industry is incredibly enthusiastic. They are 120% enthusiastic, especially because they are usually American, and American baseline levels of enthusiasm are about 4 or 5 times baseline British levels of enthusiasm on any topic. So it's always this weird culture shock to have that conversation, and they're very, very keen, and they're going to do this and going to do that, and then 9 times out of 10 you will never ever hear from them again. And this kind of gets weirdly exhausting because you have this conversation, and you're trying to match that level of, yes, let's do this thing, this will be great, it'll be the greatest thing ever, it'll be fantastic, kind of knowing that, you know, this is just going to be dropped into a void. And it's not always the case. I mean, as I say, we have actually sold some options, which is, you know, a stage you usually don't get to. And that there's another project which I absolutely cannot talk about, which I am considerably more involved in the sense that I'm actually doing some of the writing overview and that kind of thing. I don't know whether that will go any further than that, because obviously you reach the point where you have to interest someone who has a large bucket of money they're willing to give the people to make the thing, which is where a lot of these fall over. But who knows? I mean, at least at that point I've been involved, and I've learnt skills effectively, and I've learned how to do things in writing things that I did not know before. So I've benefited from that in a variety of ways.
Just so you know, I did give a copy of Children of Time to a couple of Hollywood actors. I had, do you know, I mean, maybe they'll have some pull and something will happen there, Adrian, I'm not sure, but Dominic Monaghan and Billy Boyd from Lord of the Rings. Well, Dominic was on our show. We did a trivia session, so we chatted a few times on email, and he's got their podcast, but I saw them at Toronto's Fan Expo, and it was Billy's birthday, and gave them a copy of your book, and Billy, they hadn't read it, but Billy said, I heard that's great. And they have a copy of your book, and haven't heard from them since after saying, hey, hope you guys are well, and all that. But they have it, they've read it, or may have, and well, I hope they have. I mean, who doesn't want to read a good book? And also, Dominic has he loves spiders. That guy's into insects, and
does he really?
Travel. He does. He's done a few shows. Sorry, he's done one show where he has traveled and gone and explored different wildlife, and he loves spiders and insects. So that was one motivation to get him a copy of that book when I saw him in Toronto. So to meet up with him, but just so you know.
Oh, thank you very much, and I'm rather delighted to hear that that he's a fan of spiders. That's always good.
Well, he should just call up his buddy Peter Jackson. I think he'd be a good candidate for making a film like that, right? He could do it.
Well, he's had spiders in a few movies, hasn't he?
I must say, I did rather like the Shelob in Lord of the Rings, even though Tolkien didn't have much of an idea of how spiders work anatomically, hence the whole stinger business.
Oh, right.
It's just one of it's one of those when you know too much about a subject, it becomes quite hard to kind of turn that off. And so when the kind of the Shelob stinger comes out, you think, what's that coming from? Where's the wasp in this spider precisely? But the way she moves and the way she kind of squeezes out from the little gap when you see it, I thought that's all extremmany well done.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that scene. And also, there's another spider scene in the second Hobbit book when they're in Mirkwood. And actually, when Bilbo puts on the ring, you hear the thoughts of the spiders.
Well, this is what I always, when I was a kid and reading The Hobbit, I always liked the fact that when you got to the spider, they weren't just monsters. They had this whole kind of, the society, and they kind of chat and complain to each other and all that sort of thing. And I then I wrote a book called Spiderlight, which I think is still the least regarded of all of my books. But that has a whole thing which is kind of my Mirkwood takes. You've got a very, very Tolkien style, Mirkwood style spider, sort of spider colony in a forest at the beginning of the book. And that then one of the spiders basically gets effectively abducted from the forest by a band of adventurers because of a prophecy which says you basically need a giant spider if you're going to defeat the Dark Lord. And then they have to smuggle the spider through all the kingdoms of the kind of light and goodness without getting it sort of killed or sort of picked up by the priests and the paladins.
Huh. Cool.
Well, seriously though, Peter Jackson's production company, Wignut Films, I think it's called. They did the Beatles Get Back documentary, which used a lot of AI technology to reconstruct the visuals and audios, and that it's the equivalent of the deepfake technology that's used. You could almost train those same types of algorithms to be able to understand spiders, to be able to see octopi or octopuses, and follow their behavior through completely CG characters. And
I don't think visually creating the characters in with using CGI or whatever means is the big challenge with those books. It's the fact that you have to get inside the characters. It's the you're not it's not. It's as if you're trying to do Lord of the Rings from the point of view of Shelob, only Shelob doesn't actually have that regular language. So, like I say, in any adaptation you have to compromise. So I'm sure there is a path you can tread where you're keeping enough of the original to make it worthwhile, and you're still able to bring that over. But obviously, on the page, you have an enormous advantage because you can just talk in considerable detail to your readers and guide them through what's going on and act as that sort of interpreter in a way that a film doesn't usually have. Not unless you have the whole thing dubbed over by David Attenborough, of course, explaining them.
Right, I got
I
it.
almost visualize it as almost like a Terrence Malick film, if you're familiar with his stuff, but it's just footage, and you just get that. Our Thin Red Line was a film of his, where you get inner dialogue, but you get the whole film visually telling the story. And I kind of see it like that. If I was to visualize these spiders communicating, I see beautiful visuals with almost just a voices that kind of are separate from plot and story. I'll write the script, Adrian. We'll talk.
Well, Adrian, while we've been talking about spiders again in Children of Time, and we even mentioned something about octopuses, and today is the great release of Children of Memory, but we haven't read it yet. Can you tell us more about that book? I gather it's about Corvid intelligence. Is that it? Is that where we're going?
So Corvid intelligence is a big part of it. It's not quite the central theme that the spiders and the octopuses were in the previous two books. It's one of the things going on in the book, essentially. As for what the book is mostly about, it's really hard to say because the point of the book is that it's a mystery. It is one of those books where you're supposed to kind of piece together what's going on as it goes. It's also the third of a series, so it makes it the hardest book to talk about that I've ever written. There are, like the previous two books, there are two plot lines. There's a plot line involving the Portiad sort of multi-species spacefaring culture, taken from the point of view of a fairly unusual narrator, to wit, a kind of an alien compound sentience, one of the things you meet in Children of Ruin. Which in Children of Ruin you mostly meet as a problem. In book 3 they are a protagonist. It's also the story of another human colonization effort. So there is another Ark ship going back in time. There's another Ark ship that finds one of the semi-terraformed worlds, and it's to do with their struggle to build something on this world which has not really been left in a fit state to be lived on, and the society that develops there. And then obviously you're aware that the spacefaring culture is going to catch up with them, and kind of you will get this first contact situation seen from both sides, depending on how the more advanced culture decides to play it. Except that there's other stuff going on as well.
Nice. All
Well,
right.
just so you know there, Marty, there are 4 copies at Indigo on Stone Road.
right now.
Right now.
I gotta go.
No joking though, Adrian. Seriously, we'll be grabbing that because that's a neat
there's
little
4 of us.
surprise. Because, well, I had I used the internet and it told me 22nd of November, which is interesting because it didn't feed me the Canadian date. It fed me an English one.
Everywhere it seems to be defaulting to the UK date, including the States, which has annoyed a number of US readers who have only just found they have to wait another 2 months for it.
Ah.
And
So I could probably grab a couple boxes and hang out in Niagara Falls and make some deals. Make some sketchy book deals.
Perfectly legal, I'm sure. Scalping books.
You know you've made it when people are scalping your books.
That's right. Can I just ask about the Final Architecture series, Adrian? I know I've read The Eyes of the Void, and I'm interested to hear where that's going now. What's the next steps for that series?
Well, the third book is written and has been for a while. It's coming out in May or thereabouts. That's Lords of Uncreation, and that will be it for that series. I mean, potentially the setting could go on, but the plot line about the architects and so forth is it will be concluded in that third book.
Lords of Uncreation. Oh,
Yes.
Excellent. That's exciting.
Yeah, I was quite chuffed with it. My hit rate for titles is about 40%. But that was one of the titles I did get to keep after it passed through the various bands of sort of publishing and editing and marketing.
That's what I want to dress up as for Halloween, as a Lord of Uncreation. That just sounds awesome.
Is that a sexy Lord of Uncreation? Or
No, not sexy.
And is Children of Memory the last of that series too, or is there a possibility of more coming there?
If I have a suitably interesting idea, then there may well be more. It has actually been billed as the last book in the series, which is not in any way anything I've said to Pan Mac, but they seem to have assumed it is because it's the third book. But no, it's the 3 books. Each one builds on the last, so you kind of have to have read all of them. But they are, as you'll know from the first 2, each book has its own discrete plot rather than them being sort of 3 books as part of a large story arc or anything like that. So if I have an interesting enough idea with where I want to go, given the situation I leave myself with at the end of Children of Memory, then there may well be a 4th one or more.
Great. Or more. We could end up with another trilogy in 5 parts, like The Hitchhiker's Guide. Yeah. The book I have just finished writing is kind of became the most Douglas Adamsian thing I have ever done. I mean, which doesn't make it terribly close to Douglas Adams because, he had an extremely distinct writing style, but it's definitely the closest I'm ever going to go, I suspect, in that direction. Oh, great.
In what way?
I do occasionally veer more towards the comedy in my writing style, usually when I'm trying to write about something that's spectacularly bleak. So I wrote a book about time travel called One Day All This Will Be Yours, which is one of the Rebellion novellas, which is hopefully very funny, and people seem to find it funny in the way I intended. But it's also about a time traveller living at the end of time after a war has completely shattered the space-time continuum and murdering any other time travellers who turn up because he wants to be on his own. And so it's a horrible book about a horrible person, but to balance that out, it's also reasonably funny. And the one I've just finished is the working title is Service Model, and it's about a robot valet who discovers one morning that he's murdered his master by cutting his throat while shaving him, and has no idea why, and kind of goes on an epic quest to work out why he actually did these things, and discovers that the whole of human society is collapsing. And so it's kind of Mad Max, except instead of Mad Max you have C-3PO.
Oh, that's awesome. I want to read that. When's that coming out, Adrian? You got all these books that are
I-
in the queue, but
Yeah, I don't know because we haven't. I've written that ahead of actually nailing the contract down, so I'm not 100% sure which publisher it will be. But it could be as early as next year because if it goes to the publisher it was sort of intended for, I've got nothing else on with them at the moment.
that's exciting.
Is there anything we have not asked you about, Adrian, that you'd love to tell our listeners about?
I mean, I mean, certainly as far as my own stuff goes, I think we've covered pretty much everything that's current.
How about your favorite book of the last 2 or 3 years that you've read? What
Yeah, I've just finished R.F. Kuang's Babel, which was very much the book everyone was talking about at FantasyCon this autumn, and that is a very, very special book. It's got some of the most interesting kind of magical world building going on. It's an alternate history. It's set in the mid-19th century in England, in Oxford specifically. A lot of it. It's very concerned with imperialism and cultural imperialism and language, and it's got a magic system that is based on linguistics in a way I have never seen before, and it's extremely clever, and it's a very powerful book as well.
Babel. Yeah.
No, that
It
is
sounds
an
like a
excellent
good one.
book.
The full title
And
is Babel, or the Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. Is that the one?
That's the one.
Okay.
And this is a young new author, or who?
R.F. Kuang, she did extremely well with the series starting with the Poppy War a few years ago. And I think this is her second kind of major release after that series.
Excellent. Well, good to know. Well, Adrian, thank you so much. I'll be on my way to the bookstore. I think Marty too. Kevin will be downloading his, I think, right?
Click and buy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and yes, by all means, do give me a shout in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us yet again on Tales from the Bridge. Thank you, Adrian, for joining us. Next week, Peter Watson, Carl Schrader, and they talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but I mean, it's really about pessimism and optimism, and you can probably guess who is who. Join us for that one next Wednesday night, Thursday morning, depending on where on the planet you are. Until next time.